The phrase, "you wouldn't understand this," said the businessman about the contract, until the maid read every clause out loud, resonates deeply when we reflect on the United States of America. Much like that arrogant businessman, many outside observers, and even American citizens themselves, often assume that the complexity of this country is beyond common understanding. Yet just like the maid who uncovered the fine print of the contract, a careful and methodical analysis reveals fundamental truths about this nation that shapes the modern world. The United States was born from a fundamental contradiction that persists to this day. Founded on the principles of liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness, the country simultaneously upheld slavery as a central economic institution. This duality was not a historical accident, but rather a defining feature that continues to manifest throughout the American experience. The founding documents, written by men who owned other human beings, proclaimed universal truths about inalienable rights. This irony was not lost on critics at the time, nor should it be overlooked by contemporary observers. The American Constitution, often revered as a sacred document, was in reality a pragmatic agreement between conflicting interests. Federalists and anti-federalists debated not only government structures, but the very nature of democracy and power. The system of checks and balances, far from being divinely inspired, was a clever solution designed to accommodate mutual distrust and regional ambition. Understanding this pragmatic origin helps demystify much of what appears inexplicable in modern American politics. American territorial expansion was not merely a manifestation of manifest destiny. It was an economic necessity disguised as a divine mission. The South's agricultural economy depended on the continuous growth of cultivable land, while the industrial North needed markets and resources. The war against Mexico, the Louisiana Purchase, the annexation of Texas, all were fundamentally economic transactions justified by nationalist rhetoric. The development of the Transcontinental Railroad perfectly exemplifies this dynamic. Marketed to the public as a triumph of American engineering and a symbol of progress, it was in fact a venture funded by massive government subsidies, built by exploited immigrant labor, and resulted in obscene fortunes for a few politically connected investors. The ghost towns of the American West are silent monuments to this brutal economic reality, masked by romantic narratives of pioneering and bravery. The 20th century established the United States as the global superpower, but this status was built on complex foundations, often misunderstood. The wartime economy of World War II not only defeated fascism, it fundamentally transformed America's economic structure. The military-industrial complex, a term coined by President Eisenhower, became a permanent engine of technological innovation and economic growth. Silicon Valley, the contemporary symbol of American innovation, originated in Cold War military contracts. The Internet, GPS, touchscreen technology, all emerged from Department of Defense-funded projects. This symbiosis between the public and private sectors contradicts simplistic narratives about free markets and individual entrepreneurship that dominate American political discourse. At the same time, this machine of innovation has produced unprecedented inequality. The same forces that created tech billionaires also hollowed out entire industrial communities. Detroit, once a symbol of American industrial might, became emblematic of urban decline. This duality, explosive innovation coexisting with social deterioration, defines much of the contemporary American experience. American culture exerts unparalleled global influence, but this influence often obscures the country's deep internal divisions. Hollywood exports an idealized version of American life that starkly contrasts with the lived realities of millions. American pop culture sells dreams of social mobility and individual success, while socioeconomic data reveals declining mobility and increasing wealth concentration. The concept of the American dream functions simultaneously as a genuine inspiration and a mechanism of social control. It promises that hard work and determination will guarantee success, implicitly blaming individual failure for structural problems. This powerful narrative explains both the resilience and the frustration that characterize much of the American experience. The American political system, often presented as a democratic model, contains deeply undemocratic features. The Electoral College can override the popular vote. The Senate gives disproportionate power to sparsely populated rural states. Gerrymandering allows politicians to choose their voters instead of the other way around. Institutionalized lobbying turns political access into a marketable commodity. These characteristics are not bugs in the system, they are intentional features designed by the founders to moderate direct democracy and protect established interests. Understanding this reality helps explain why fundamental political change is so difficult to achieve even when supported by substantial majorities. Like the maid who unraveled the complex contract, understanding the United States requires looking beyond surface narratives and examining the underlying structures that shape the American experience. This country is neither the idealized democratic beacon admired by its supporters nor the malevolent empire demonized by its critics. It is a complex, contradictory, and ever-evolving human experiment. True understanding of the United States arises not from embracing national mythologies, but from carefully analyzing how power, economy, and culture interact to produce both extraordinary opportunities and persistent injustices. Only through this careful reading of the clauses of the American experience can we truly comprehend this nation that continues to shape the global future. "You wouldn't understand this," said the businessman about the contract, until the maid read every clause out loud. This simple narrative perfectly encapsulates the American experience, a nation whose true complexity has been obscured by those who benefit from its misunderstanding, only to be revealed by careful, methodical examination. Like that dismissive businessman, America's elite have long insisted that the intricacies of power, economics, and governance are beyond common comprehension. Yet, like the observant maid, those willing to read between the lines discover truths that challenge conventional wisdom about the world's most influential democracy. The United States operates through a sophisticated system of influence that extends far beyond traditional governmental structures. Corporate lobbying, once a marginal activity, has evolved into a trillion-dollar industry that fundamentally shapes policy outcomes. The revolving door between government positions and private sector roles ensures that regulatory capture is not an exception, but a feature of the system. Former Treasury secretaries routinely return to Wall Street firms, former Pentagon officials join defense contractors, and former Federal Communications Commission chairs migrate to telecommunications companies. This system creates what scholars term policy feedback loops, where those who benefit from existing arrangements possess the resources and access necessary to perpetuate and expand those benefits. The complexity of modern legislation, often running thousands of pages, ensures that only well-resourced interests can effectively navigate and influence the lawmaking process. Small businesses, individual citizens, and even smaller advocacy groups find themselves systematically disadvantaged, not by explicit exclusion, but by the sheer complexity of engaging with the system. Consider the 2008 financial crisis response. While public attention focused on visible elements like bank bailouts and stimulus packages, the most consequential decisions occurred in technical regulatory details and Federal Reserve policies that received minimal public scrutiny. Quantitative easing, stress tests, and accounting rule modifications had far greater long-term impact than the headline measures, yet remained largely incomprehensible to general audiences. American technological supremacy rests on a foundation that contradicts dominant narratives about free market capitalism and individual entrepreneurship. The most transformative technologies of the past century emerged from government-funded research programs, military contracts, and public universities. The Internet originated from DARPANET, GPS technology developed from military navigation systems, and touchscreen interfaces evolved from research funded by the CIA and NSF. Silicon Valley's success story deliberately obscures these public investments, instead promoting mythologies of garage-based startups and visionary entrepreneurs. This narrative serves multiple purposes. It justifies enormous private profits from publicly funded research, supports political arguments for reduced government spending on research and development, and maintains the cultural mystique that attracts global talent and investment to American technology sectors. The venture capital ecosystem that funds American innovation operates through networks of personal relationships, elite university connections, and inherited wealth that directly contradict meritocratic ideals. Access to capital correlates strongly with demographic characteristics, geographic location, and social connections, rather than purely with innovation potential. Studies consistently show that women, minorities and entrepreneurs from non-coastal regions face systematic disadvantages in accessing venture funding, regardless of their business prospects. American workers operate under what economists call employment at will, the principle that employers can terminate workers for any reason or no reason, provided they don't violate specific anti-discrimination laws. This arrangement, unique among developed nations, fundamentally alters the power relationship between capital and labor. Combined with weak social safety nets compared to European standards, American workers face significantly higher personal risks from economic downturns, technological displacement, and employer decisions. The gig economy, celebrated as entrepreneurial liberation, actually represents a systematic transfer of business risks from corporations to individual workers. Uber drivers absorb vehicle costs, maintenance expenses, insurance risks, and income volatility while being classified as independent contractors without traditional employee protections. This model has expanded across industries, from delivery services to professional consulting, effectively undermining the post-World War II social contract that provided stability in exchange for loyalty. Healthcare's connection to employment creates additional power imbalances rarely acknowledged in political discourse. American workers often remain in suboptimal jobs, specifically to maintain health insurance coverage, particularly those with chronic conditions or family medical needs. This job lock phenomenon reduces labor mobility, entrepreneurship, and wage negotiation power while increasing employer leverage over workforce decisions. American elections generate enormous attention and participation, yet many of the most consequential policy decisions occur through processes largely insulated from democratic input. Federal Reserve monetary policy, Supreme Court constitutional interpretation, and administrative agency regulations shape American life more directly than most legislative actions, yet operate through appointment systems and technical expertise rather than electoral accountability. The primary election system, supposedly democratic, actually concentrates power among the most ideologically committed voters in each party. This creates incentives for candidates to appeal to partisan bases rather than median voters, contributing to political polarization. Additionally, the enormous financial requirements for competitive campaigns effectively screen out candidates without access to wealthy networks or corporate support. Gerrymandering, while receiving periodic attention, represents only the most visible form of electoral manipulation. Voter registration requirements, polling location decisions, early voting availability, and ballot design all influence electoral outcomes while remaining largely invisible to casual observers. These technical decisions, made by election officials and state legislators, often have greater impact on electoral outcomes than campaign activities that receive media coverage. The global contract. America's international influence operates through mechanisms that extend far beyond military power or diplomatic relationships. Dollar dominance in international trade gives American policymakers extraordinary leverage over global economic decisions. When the Federal Reserve adjusts interest rates to address domestic concerns, it simultaneously influences capital flows, currency values, and economic conditions worldwide. American technology platforms shape global information flows in ways that traditional media never could. Facebook's algorithm changes affect political discourse across continents. Google's search results influence what billions of people know about current events. Amazon's marketplace policies determine which small businesses worldwide can access global consumers. These private companies exercise quasi-governmental power over global communications and commerce with minimal democratic accountability. Reading the real contract. Understanding America requires recognizing that its official descriptions often obscure rather than illuminate actual operations. Constitutional principles, democratic ideals, and free market rhetoric provide important aspirational frameworks, but the nation's daily reality emerges from complex interactions between economic incentives, institutional arrangements, and power relationships that rarely receive systematic examination. Like the maid who revealed the contract's true meaning, comprehensive understanding emerges not from accepting surface explanations, but from careful analysis of how systems actually function. This approach reveals neither a perfect democracy nor a completely corrupted system, but rather a complex arrangement of competing interests, institutional constraints, and evolving power relationships that continue to shape global civilization's trajectory. America's social contract. The unspoken terms. The businessman's condescending dismissal, "You wouldn't understand this," echoes throughout American society in countless variations. From healthcare executives explaining why medical costs must remain opaque, to financial advisors insisting that retirement planning requires professional expertise, to politicians claiming that complex legislation demands specialized knowledge beyond citizen comprehension. Yet, like the maid who methodically read each clause aloud, ordinary Americans who take time to examine the fine print of their social contract discover systematic arrangements that transfer risk downward while concentrating benefits upward. The healthcare labyrinth. American healthcare represents perhaps the most complex and deliberately obfuscated system in any developed nation. Patients receive bills with dozens of line items using medical codes incomprehensible to healthcare providers themselves. Insurance companies employ armies of specialists whose primary function is denying claims through procedural technicalities. Hospital systems merge into regional monopolies while maintaining the fiction of competitive markets. The actual cost of medical procedures remains hidden through negotiated rates between insurers and providers that vary dramatically for identical services. A simple blood test might cost $50 at one facility and $500 at another, with no relationship to quality or convenience. Patients discover these price differences only after receiving treatment, when bills arrive weeks later with non-negotiable charges. Emergency medical treatment creates particularly exploitative scenarios. Unconscious patients have no ability to choose in-network providers, yet face financial devastation from out-of-network charges that can exceed $100,000 for routine procedures. Air ambulance services, often the only option for trauma cases, operate as predatory businesses charging $40,000 or more for short flights, while remaining outside insurance networks. Prescription drug pricing exemplifies systematic extraction from captive populations. Medications that cost $10 to manufacture retail for $300 or more, with price increases that far exceed inflation rates. Pharmaceutical companies extend patent protections through minor modifications, preventing generic competition for decades. Insulin, discovered nearly a century ago, costs diabetic Americans $300 monthly, while identical formulations sell for $30 in neighboring countries. Educational debt peonage. Higher education has evolved into a debt creation mechanism that transfers wealth from students and families to institutional administrators, real estate developers, and financial services companies. Universities expanded dramatically, not by improving educational outcomes, but by constructing luxury facilities funded through student loans that cannot be discharged in bankruptcy. Administrative positions multiplied far faster than faculty hiring, creating bureaucratic layers that add costs without improving education. Universities employ more administrators than teachers, while student debt has increased 400% faster than inflation over 3 decades. Meanwhile, adjunct professors, the actual providers of education, work without benefits or job security, often earning less than minimum wage when preparation time is included. The credentialing arms race forces students into debt for positions that previously required only high school diplomas. Administrative assistants now need bachelor's degrees, customer service representatives require college education, and entry-level positions demand qualifications that exceed those of senior employees hired decades earlier. This inflation of requirements creates artificial scarcity in employment while generating revenue streams for educational institutions. Federal student loan programs, presented as democratizing higher education, actually enabled institutions to raise prices without market constraints. Guaranteed government loans eliminate price sensitivity, allowing universities to increase tuition annually while degrading educational quality. Students borrow against future earnings to pay for amenities and administrative salaries that don't improve their career prospects. The retirement mirage. The transition from defined benefit pensions to 401k retirement accounts represents one of the largest wealth transfers in American history, though it was presented as empowering workers with investment choices. Companies eliminated guaranteed retirement income while maintaining the same total compensation costs, effectively requiring employees to become investment specialists for financial security. 401k systems generate enormous fees for financial services companies while providing inferior retirement security compared to traditional pensions. Management fees, trading costs, and advisory charges consume 20–30% of retirement savings over working careers, while investment choices are deliberately complex to discourage employee engagement. Most workers cannot distinguish between expense ratios, load fees, and management charges, yet face personal responsibility for navigating these decisions. Social Security, despite being the most successful anti-poverty program in American history, faces deliberate undermining through complexity and misinformation. Political rhetoric about bankruptcy and unsustainability creates artificial crises, while simple adjustments like raising the income cap would ensure long-term solvency. Instead, policymakers promote privatization schemes that would transfer Social Security funds to Wall Street while reducing benefits for future retirees. Medicare, similarly successful at controlling costs and providing coverage, faces constant political attacks designed to create private sector opportunities. Medicare Advantage plans, heavily promoted by insurance companies, actually cost more than traditional Medicare while providing fewer benefits and restricting provider choices. Yet marketing campaigns convince seniors they're receiving extra benefits while paying higher total costs. Housing as financial instrument. American housing policy prioritizes real estate appreciation over housing affordability, creating systematic advantages for existing owners while excluding potential buyers. Zoning regulations, building codes, and permitting processes deliberately restrict housing supply in desirable areas, inflating values for current residents while pricing out younger generations and lower-income families. The mortgage interest deduction, largest middle-class tax benefit, disproportionately aids wealthy homeowners while providing no assistance to renters. This policy encourages excessive borrowing for housing purchases while subsidizing speculation in real estate markets. Combined with property tax deductions, homeownership receives $200 billion annually in federal subsidies, yet rental assistance receives less than $50 billion despite serving lower-income populations. Homeowners associations, HOAs, have evolved into private governance structures that enforce property values through restrictive covenants, architectural controls, and lifestyle regulations. These quasi-governmental bodies can foreclose on properties for minor violations while operating with minimal democratic accountability. HOAs particularly target behaviors associated with lower-income residents, effectively maintaining class segregation through private enforcement. The true social contract. Reading America's actual social contract requires recognizing that official rhetoric about opportunity, meritocracy, and individual responsibility often masks systematic arrangements that socialize risks while privatizing benefits. Healthcare, education, retirement, and housing, the four pillars of middle-class security, have been restructured to generate profits for intermediaries while increasing uncertainty for ordinary families. Like the Maid who revealed the contract's true meaning, Americans who examine these systems carefully discover that complexity serves specific interests. Opacity prevents effective reform, confusion discourages organized resistance, and technical language excludes public participation in policy decisions that fundamentally affect their lives. Understanding these hidden clauses doesn't require advanced degrees or specialized expertise. It requires only the patience to read carefully and the willingness to question authoritative dismissals. The businessman's condescension relies on intimidation rather than genuine complexity, and like all forms of exploitation, it crumbles under sustained examination. The digital contract, Silicon Valley's hidden terms of service. You wouldn't understand this, the tech executive insists when questioned about algorithmic bias, data harvesting, or platform manipulation. Like the arrogant businessman dismissing concerns about contractual fine print, Silicon Valley has cultivated an aura of technical complexity that discourages scrutiny of its business practices. Yet, as the observant Maid discovered by reading each clause carefully, the most important terms of America's digital transformation become clear through patient examination of how these systems actually operate rather than how they're marketed to the public. The surveillance economy's architecture, the foundation of American digital capitalism, rests on what Harvard Business School professor Shoshana Zuboff terms surveillance capitalism, the systematic extraction of human behavioral data for predictive analysis and behavioral modification. This represents a fundamental departure from traditional market relationships, where companies provided products or services in exchange for payment. Instead, users become the product being sold to advertisers, political operatives, and other interested parties. Google processes over 8.5 billion searches daily, creating detailed psychological profiles of individual users that extend far beyond their explicit queries. Search algorithms don't merely return relevant results, they shape what users discover, believe, and ultimately do. The company's revenue model depends on maintaining user engagement rather than providing accurate information, creating systematic incentives to promote sensational, emotionally provocative content over factual reporting. Facebook's internal documents, revealed through whistleblower testimony, demonstrate that the platform's executives understood their algorithms promoted divisive content while publicly claiming to connect communities. The engagement-driven model rewards posts that generate strong emotional responses, anger, fear, outrage, while suppressing content that promotes thoughtful discussion or nuanced analysis. This isn't an unintended consequence, but a deliberate design choice optimized for advertising revenue. Amazon's marketplace appears to offer consumer choice while systematically undermining independent retailers and manipulating search results to favor its private label products. The company uses sales data from third-party sellers to identify successful products, then creates competing versions while adjusting search algorithms to promote Amazon-branded alternatives. Small businesses become unwitting market research providers for their own replacement. The gig economy's false promise platform companies like Uber, DoorDash, and TaskRabbit present themselves as technology innovators, connecting service providers with consumers. In reality, they function as labor brokers that have successfully redefined employment relationships to avoid traditional worker protections while extracting value from both sides of transactions. The independent contractor classification allows these companies to transfer business costs, vehicle expenses, insurance, equipment, maintenance to workers while maintaining algorithmic control over their activities. Drivers cannot set their own prices, choose their service areas, or access customer contact information, yet bear full responsibility for business risks. This arrangement socializes costs while privatizing profits in ways that would be impossible under traditional employment relationships. Platform algorithms manipulate worker behavior through psychological techniques borrowed from casino design. Surge pricing creates artificial scarcity that encourages drivers to work longer hours during peak periods. Achievement badges, driver ratings, and bonus structures gamify work experiences while providing minimal actual benefits. Push notifications use behavioral psychology to increase labor supply during high-demand periods without corresponding wage increases. The network effects that make platforms valuable to users simultaneously create winner-take-all markets that eliminate competition. Once Uber dominates local transportation markets, drivers have few alternatives, while passengers become dependent on the platform. This market concentration allows platforms to extract increasingly larger percentages of transaction values while degrading service quality and worker compensation. Data colonialism and digital extraction. American technology companies have established what researchers call data colonialism, the appropriation of human behavioral data for capital accumulation without meaningful consent or compensation. This process operates through deliberately complex privacy policies, default settings that maximize data collection, and user interfaces designed to discourage privacy-protective behaviors. Terms of service agreements, which users must accept to access digital services, routinely exceed 10,000 words and require college-level reading skills to comprehend. These documents grant platforms extraordinary rights to collect, analyze, and sell personal information while users retain virtually no control over how their data is used. Legal language deliberately obscures the scope of data collection and the permanence of consent once granted. Children represent particularly vulnerable targets for data extraction. Educational technology platforms collect detailed information about student learning patterns, social interactions, and behavioral responses that follow them throughout their academic careers. Gaming platforms and social media apps use behavioral psychology to maintain engagement among users, whose cognitive development makes them especially susceptible to addictive design patterns. Location tracking continues even when users believe they've disabled it. Through Wi-Fi connections, Bluetooth beacons, and accelerometer data that can infer movement patterns. Facial recognition technology operates in retail stores, airports, and public spaces without explicit consent or notification. Voice assistants record conversations beyond their activation phrases, creating permanent records of private family interactions. The innovation mythology. Silicon Valley promotes mythologies about technological progress that obscure the extractive nature of digital business models. Disruption rhetoric frames the elimination of worker protections, privacy rights, and market regulations as inevitable technological advancement rather than deliberate policy choices that benefit platform owners at public expense. The move fast and break things philosophy encourages companies to deploy technologies without considering social consequences, then address problems after achieving market dominance. This approach socializes the costs of technological experimentation while privatizing benefits, forcing communities to adapt to business models designed without their input or consent. Venture capital funding structures incentivize companies to prioritize rapid growth over sustainable business models, creating systematic pressure to externalize costs onto users, workers, and communities. The requirement for exponential returns drives platforms toward monopolistic practices, user exploitation, and regulatory capture as natural business strategies rather than ethical failures. Democratic implications. The concentration of information control in the hands of a few technology executives represents an unprecedented threat to democratic governance. Platform algorithms determine what information citizens receive about political candidates, policy issues, and current events. These editorial decisions, made by unelected executives optimizing for engagement rather than democratic participation, shape public opinion more directly than traditional media ever could. Election-related disinformation spreads faster than factual information on social media platforms because false claims generate stronger emotional responses that drive engagement. Foreign interference in American elections operates primarily through these platforms, yet companies resist meaningful oversight while claiming technical complexity prevents effective content moderation. Reading the digital fine print. Understanding America's digital transformation requires recognizing that technological complexity often serves to obscure rather than illuminate the power relationships embedded in digital systems. Like the maid who revealed the contract's hidden terms, citizens who examine these platforms carefully discover systematic arrangements designed to extract value while minimizing accountability. The businessman's dismissive, "You wouldn't understand," echoes throughout Silicon Valley's response to criticism, regulatory oversight, and democratic accountability. Yet the most important aspects of digital platforms, their business models, social impacts, and political influence, become comprehensible through careful analysis of how they actually operate rather than how they market themselves to users and policymakers.